Hey guys, so we're up to our next lecture on our unit leading up to the Civil War. So we're now going to actually today be talking about the events and the years that led up to the actual outbreak of the war in 1861. But before we get started, I want to introduce you to my new friend over here. This is Bill Wilkins. So I've talked about him a few times in class. He is the guy from the movie The Conjuring, and he is just, I'm just always entertained. So I made this meme. So a Southerner being told that slavery was wrong. So crazy concept, I know. So we are going to discuss this today and how that led to the South starting to secede or remove themselves from the nation by the time we're going to talk about the war breaking out. So where we left off last time, we talked about four big events that kind of helped push the North and South further apart, being the Kansas-Nebraska Act, the Fugitive Slave Laws, the Dred Scott decision, and John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry and his subsequent execution. Some saw him as a great guy, some saw him as the first terrorist that this country ever had. So we'll leave that up to you. But the first thing I want to talk about today is Lincoln and slavery. So Lincoln and his views on slavery, and leading up to him ultimately getting the nomination. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. So we're going to start out with the 1858 Senate election. So the 1858 Senate election. This was one of the most important and most infamous elections in U.S. history. Something really important to note. These debates, these arguments kind of set the stage for what was going to happen in the United States for the next, I guess, 150 years. So on the Democrat side, we had Douglas, Stephen A. Douglas. He was running for Senate. He was from Illinois. This is for the Illinois Senate. So he pushed this thing called popular sovereignty, vocab word you need to know. So he pushed this thing called popular sovereignty. So that was where the states had the right to decide whether they wanted to have slavery or not. So essentially, in theory, the people of the state had the right to vote on whether they wanted their state to be a slave or free state. But let's think about this. How could something being left up to a vote have means for fraud? We'll talk about that. So on the Democrat side, we had Stephen Douglas. On the Republican side, we had this new guy called Abraham Lincoln. So we mentioned a little bit of him during the Mexican-American War. He was just a state legislator during that time. So he was kind of at the state level, not the national level. So he was on the Republican side, and he was pushing for the thought, like his idea was that he was willing to allow slavery where it was, but he refused to let it expand, which, he said, slavery, I have no intentions of ever ending slavery. I personally don't like it, but I'm fine where it's at, just as long as it doesn't expand out of the South. He was more scared of it expanding out of the South than anything else. So you got the Democrats and the Republican side. So Lincoln's views on slavery. So personally, like I just mentioned, Lincoln hated slavery, but he did not see African Americans, free or enslaved, as equal. So a quote by him. This is what I want you to pay attention to. This quote: "I want every man to have a chance. I believe a black man is entitled to it, in which he can better his condition. Blacks might not be equal of whites in all respects, but in their natural right to the fruits of their labor, they are my equal and equals of all others." So just looking at that, I want you to look at that and really kind of break it down and put it into your own words. So what is that saying right there? The one part that really stuck out to me, I want you to think about, because we're going to discuss this together. I believe a black man is entitled to it being a fair chance in which he can better his condition. Notice, put emphasis on better his condition. Blacks might not be equal of whites in all respects, but in their natural right to the fruits of their labor, they are equal. So what he's saying is, they deserve a chance to better themselves, which, I mean, you want to better yourself. He's not saying, oh, they're equal like me, but they don't deserve to be a slave. So it's kind of hypocritical in my point of view for him to be, again, personally hate slavery, but still not see them as equal people. But anyway, so I want you to answer, what does that mean to you exactly? So we will discuss that as a class. So put a star beside that one. So we get to the effects of the Lincoln-Douglas campaign. So the Lincoln-Douglas campaign. So they're starting to campaign against each other to get elected to the Illinois Senate. So this is where Lincoln came out with his famous House Divided speech. So Lincoln was quoted as saying, "A house divided cannot stand. This government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free." So what exactly does that mean to you? A house divided. So, he's talking symbolically of the nation. So a nation divided can't stand. So a nation that has half slave, half free won't last. It's either got to be one way or another. But now he wasn't calling for a war, but he said that there's no middle ground. It has to either be one way or another. Now Douglas, his view on the other hand, is that he thought that it could end up spreading across the country if left up to the people. Popular sovereignty, somehow it ended up leading to spreading across the country. Okay, so Lincoln and Douglas's view on race. So we get there, kind of starting how the campaign's going, this House Divided speech. So Douglas believed that the government was created by the white man and for the white man as well. So typical Southern view of the time, even though he was a Northern. So wait, you mean to tell me that even people in the North, maybe they weren't for slavery, but they didn't see African Americans as being equal to them. So wow, it's almost like discrimination and racial prejudice existed throughout the United States. So anyway, Douglas believed that the government was created by white men for white men forever. Lincoln actually shared many of these white supremacist views. So we're looking at their views on race. So Lincoln and Douglas shared a lot of the same views regarding race. So for example, about Lincoln, and sharing these same white supremacist is what it is, views. So Lincoln spoke frequently about colonizing black people back to Africa and refusing to give them the right to vote, even if they were free up north. So he said, you may be free, but that's great. I'm glad you're not a slave, but you're not going to have the right to vote still. So you're considered a human, which that means you get all the rights under the Constitution, but still you're not considered a human. Kind of contradictory, yes, I know. So at the end of the day, both held these racist views, but Lincoln just didn't appeal to racists to win the election, whereas Douglas was like, all right, I want to get elected, so I'm going to tap into that racial anger that even Northerners had and that racial prejudice and say, you know what, just vote for me because I'll make sure that the United States, as he says, stays created by white men and stays for the white man forever. So that appeal to racism ended up getting Douglas reelected to the Illinois Senate. So he won. He beat Lincoln in this 1858 election. But this set the stage for the 1860 presidential election, which will see them kind of rematch and go against each other once again. So this rise of Southern nationalism. Okay, so the Southern nationalism. So the Southern elites, the rich, they believed that their ability to gain more wealth, the way for them to gain more wealth was to split with the North. So why? So they wanted to gain more wealth, but they said, this time of being in the Union's not helping us out. So to make more money, we need to split. So why? Their version of liberty, so their version of living their life like they wanted to, was the ability to own slaves and land. And they saw both of those as being under threat from the North. So the Northerners saw their version of being free and to live or the Southerners, saw their way of being able to live their life was to be able to have slavery. But they're being told it's wrong. So they're just like, oh no, this is our way of life. So their version of liberty, to live their life the way they wanted it, is the ability to own slaves and land that was under threat. And both of those are being under threat from the North. So they believed that the North benefited from this cotton trade that the South ended up falling deeper and deeper into debt. So the Southern elites, even while they were making money hand over fist, they believed, the Northerners are the ones that are benefiting from all this, and we're doing all the work. So we're harvesting and growing all this cotton, but yet the Southerners are making all the money off of it because they have the industry. And so they ended up using that as looking like their rallying cry. And so next vocab word, hint, hint, secessionist, to secede, secessionist. They were also known as fire eaters. So fire eaters. And they began to push for the South to break away in order to save slavery. So they said, okay, we're going to save the South. We're going to save the slavery. We need to break away from the North. We need to create our own country that we can grow into an empire to spread slavery, not kill slavery. So these were the fire eaters. So anyway, we get to the 1860 election. So the 1860 election. So on the Democrat side, the Democrats were split over slavery. So the Democrats were split over slavery. So we had Douglas and this guy named John Breckinridge. So John Breckinridge. Both of them were Democrats, but they were split over their views on slavery. So the Democrat Party actually split in two. So we had the Northern Democrats and the Southern Democrats. So the Northern Democrats nominated Douglas as their nominee for president and supported his views on popular sovereignty. So the Northern Democrats had Douglas. The Southern Democrats walked out of the convention and said, no, we want slavery, so we're just going to split, make our own party, the Southern Democrats. And so they walked out because of their views, and they nominated John Breckinridge because he was pro-slavery. He was for the South to have slavery. So he was for slavery. So Breckinridge, Southern Democrats, Douglas, Northern Democrats. How do we think that's going to work out? You've got a group of people, and their votes usually go to one person, and now they're being split into two. How do we think that's going to go? Anyway, the Republicans had Lincoln. So Lincoln was nominated because he, A, denied the Dred Scott decision, B, he was against slavery expansion, and C, he was for government expansion. So he wanted more power to the government. He also was against slavery expansion. So he was still okay with slavery being where it's at. But we just can't let it spread to all the Western territories. So what were these results? What were the results of this 1860 election? So honestly, the results split based on what part of the country you were in. So if you were in the North went strictly pretty much all for Lincoln. If you're in the South, it didn't go one vote. Not one vote was cast for Lincoln in the South. So the Southerners believed that he was horrible. They refused to vote for him, refused to even put him on the ballot. So, and out west, it just depended on where you were in, what part of the country, depending on what part you got votes. So Lincoln won, even though he did not have a majority of the popular vote, but he had the most electoral college votes. So Lincoln only got like 43% of the vote. And he was able to win because the North had a lot more people. They had a higher population, which we see that's what gets you the electoral college votes. So he was able to win these states that had the higher electoral college votes. So even though he only won like 43% of the vote, he ended up winning because he had more electoral college votes. So we move on to this secessionist movement. So people in the South are outraged. They're outraged. Southern states are saying, if Lincoln wins, we are going to secede. Not even give them a chance. We're just going to leave. We're leaving the United States. They just needed that kind of excuse to be able to secede. So the Southern elite, they saw the Republican victory as a threat to their way of life, as we mentioned earlier. So these Southern elites saw it as the Republicans as a threat to their way of life, being slavery. They saw Republicans being a threat to slavery. So they saw that their only way to protect slavery was to leave the Union. So they said, we are going to secede and make our own country. So they saw it as their only way to protect slavery. So in the months following the election, 7 Southern states left the Union. So 7 states voted together to leave the Union. They said, all right, Lincoln's here, we're done. We're going to do better. Deuces. So these 7 states were known as the Cotton Kingdom. So these 7 states were known as the Cotton Kingdom because the slaves made up the majority of their population. I like that. Slaves made up the majority of their population in these 7 states that were called the Cotton Kingdom. So South Carolina, of course, was the first to secede because they had the highest percentage of slaves living in their state. So South Carolina, just like, remember back in the 1820s, 1830s, when we were talking about the tariff of abominations, John Calhoun threatened to secede back in early 1800s, and we actually have South Carolina seceding. So they left the Union, first one. So we're going to have this discussion question of why you think the states with the largest population of slaves would be the ones to secede. So these 7 states had the largest number of population of slaves, and they were the first one to secede. So we're going to discuss that in class of why you think that is the case. Okay, so the reasons why the South seceded. So their reasoning, they put out this long list of things of why they seceded. So their main reason that you need to know, it was the refusal of the North to return fugitive slaves. So, these people in the North had a crazy concept that slavery was wrong. So Southerners being told that slavery was wrong, no, can't happen. That's horrible. So the main reason that the South said we're seceding because the North, they refused to return the slaves even though it's a law. So they were angry at the Northern government and the people, because they said they've always been against us. They're always against us. So they believed their struggle was similar or even greater than the American Revolution. So they believed that their struggle to protect their way of life was even more important than the American Revolution, what helped found this country. So in actuality, secession wasn't really popular across the South, as everybody makes it seem. So everybody's always like, oh yeah, the South was all together, they're all ready. So crazy concept. The main people that were for it were the elites. So the elites were the ones who were really for the secession because they saw the potential for more money. The non-slave owners and the poor were against it because they really had nothing to gain from this. And they were treated horribly by the elites, and they were being used by the elites to begin with. So they weren't really for it. They just said, okay, why would we leave this situation, go into an even worse situation, or we're going to be treated like crap either way? So the non-slave owners and the poor, so the elites only made up 10% of the South's population, only 10%. But yet they held all the power to be able to get these states to secede and break away from the country. It's almost like, there's income and wealth inequality in this country. Crazy. So anyway, the elites saw that they had to play the race card to be able to score that poor white support. So the elites realized that to be able to have this movement be successful and be able to lead the United States, they had to stir up fear among the poor and lower class white people that didn't own slaves into supporting the movement. So they said, okay, if the Republicans get to have their way, they're going to take over the South, the slaves are going to be free, and you're going to be out of a job. Where does that sound familiar? Of a certain people in power using their influence to scare people into thinking that a minority of people is going to threaten their way of life. Anyway, so they saw that they had played this fear race card to get the support of the lower class white people that did not own slaves. Okay, so we move into the secessionist crisis. So President Buchanan does absolutely nothing. So as the crisis continued, so the states are just leaving, the southern states are leaving. President Buchanan chooses to spend his last month as president essentially doing nothing. So Buchanan, he didn't even run for his second term. He realized he did not have a chance in hell. So he realizes he's just like, I'm just going to ride out these last few months, until Lincoln comes in, and then he's on his own. So he just essentially just shoves his head in the sand and acts like nothing's happening. But, so he acts like nothing is happening. He even denies that the states could secede. And he said the federal government couldn't even do anything to stop him if he wanted to. So he's one of those, you know what? I'm just going to close my eyes and pretend like it's not happening and just ignore him. So he said states can't secede, so they're not even going to do anything, even though they're physically doing that. But, I wonder why he didn't even get elected to a second term or have anybody push for him to run for a second term. So there was an attempt at a compromise. Some people didn't like just sitting there and watching it all happen and not doing anything about it, so they tried to make a compromise. That's where we get to the Crittenden Compromise. The Crittenden Compromise. So this compromise, it put forth that it said that they would have kept slavery where it was to start off with. So slavery would be kept where it was, but they extended the Missouri Compromise. So the Missouri Compromise, what we talked about earlier, it was in 1820. It said anything south of the Missouri state line was considered slavery. Anything north was considered free. They would extend that line all the way to the Pacific, so all the way to the Pacific, all the way across the country. Anything south would have the ability to be slaves, and all the north would be free. So essentially, it was expanding slavery. But they just said, oh, well, it won't go anywhere north, and we're trying to make a compromise. This was rejected by the North and the South. The South said, no, what we don't want, we want exactly what we want. We want to, break away. The North was saying, no, that's expanding slavery, which is exactly what we ran against. So can't do that. And the South, like I mentioned, they were just like, too little, too late. Sorry, too bad. So they were just bent on seceding. So we get to the Confederate States of America. They've officially broken away and formed their own country, the Confederate States of America. So 7 seceding states formed their own government and elected this guy named Jefferson Davis as their president. So Jefferson Davis was from the great state of Mississippi, and he was actually the Secretary of War in the United States before they broke away. So he was, part of the U.S. government before they broke away. So the differences with the U.S. Constitution, so this new Confederate Constitution, it was pretty much the same as the U.S. Constitution except for a few things. So the first thing being that it guaranteed slavery in the South and any new territories. So they had plans to expand in the South. They said, all right, we've got our 7 states, we're going to expand even further. And eventually they wanted to take control of other countries like Cuba, and different Caribbean and South American countries to keep the slave trade going. So they said, oh, there's money to be made. We're going to expand our empire and have influence throughout the South and South America, essentially. So they, and then the second difference is that they believed the cornerstone of their new constitution was the belief that a black person is not equal to white and that slavery is natural. So it's like a natural right. So they're saying God holds that slavery is right and it needs to be protected. So they believe that the cornerstone of their society, the cornerstone of their new constitution was the belief that black people are not equal to white people and that slavery is ordained by God. God said it is right. It is good. So that was the 2 big differences with the United States Constitution. So these first shots, talking about the first shots of the Civil War, we're getting right up to the outbreak of the Civil War. So I want to kind of recap really quick though. Was all the South for secession? No. The elites were for it, the non-slave holders were not for it. I really want to hit home with that because there's going to be, once this war breaks out, there's going to be a civil war within the Civil War. So there's going to be instances of Southerners fighting Southerners because they were against the war. They believed it was wrong. But anyway, so the Upper South was not for secession. So these border states like Kentucky and parts of Tennessee, Delaware was considered part of the South back then. Maryland, different states like that were considered border states. So they were not for secession, and they were mainly non-slaveholding. So non-slaveholding equals more tied to staying for the Union. The elites, they made up the lower South, or the Cotton Kingdom that we discussed. So these were the states that were heavily invested in cotton. The elites lived there because they owned a large plantation. So Alabama, South Carolina, Mississippi, Georgia, different states like that had a high elite population of slave owners. So we mentioned only 10% of the South population were considered elites. The other 90% of the Southern population wasn't all for the war. So Lincoln's guarantee, last section, Lincoln's guarantee and Fort Sumter. So Lincoln, he was, bound and determined to preserve the Union. He did not want the South to break away. He wanted to preserve the Union and prevent war. But he said, all right, I'm going to guarantee you that if the war is started, it will be the South that fires the first shot. So he's like, yeah, I don't want war, but all right, if war's got to happen, the South will be able to fight first. You feel kind of more justified if that happens. And he got his wish. On April 12th, so literally anniversary was, a few days ago, he got that. April 12th, 1861, Confederate troops fired on the Union-held Fort Sumter in South Carolina. So South Carolina was a southern state, seceded, but there were still forts that were technically still owned by the United States, the Union at this time. So this was a federal fort that was held by the Union, even though it was in the South. And so Jefferson Davis ordered the Confederate ship to fire on Fort Sumter. These were considered the first shots of the Civil War. So Lincoln, he capitalized on it. He declared war and called for 75,000 volunteer soldiers to fight. So he said, all right, we're at war now. I have my reason and justification to go. So he had his excuse to go fight now. So less than 100 years after the United States had become a nation, so 1776 was when the Declaration of Independence was signed and we were breaking away from England. So less than 100 years after this, the United States was now torn apart by slavery, essentially. So it was being torn apart less than 100 years from being founded. So this is our steps towards the outbreak of the Civil War. So this is a quick little unit I wanted to cover, and now we're going to break down and really get into the Civil War. So next time we meet, we will discuss the opening battles of the Civil War and kind of give you some excerpts about people that were really fighting in the war. So just a quick recap, some steps leading up to the Civil War. We mentioned the 4 big events last time. This time, we have the 1860 election. The South saw Lincoln being elected as their final straw. These fire eaters, as they were known in the South, they had their excuse to secede. They took it. They said, all right, we're going to make more money. The elite said, all right, we're going to make more money breaking away from the North, forming our own country. We're going to expand slavery throughout South America and Central America. So we have our excuse. So first shot being fired, Fort Sumter. First shot to the Civil War. So that's what we're going to leave off this time. So I hope you enjoyed, and I will talk to y'all next time.